My name is Elena Whitmore. First thing I heard was my daughter crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just one broken inhale from the front pew of St. Andrew's Chapel. And then my brother said the words that made 43 people turn toward her at the exact same moment. She manipulated our dying mother for money. Welcome back to Revenge Story HQ, where family betrayal, hidden secrets, and emotional revenge stories unfold. If you enjoy dramatic stories filled with shocking twists, manipulation, and powerful comebacks, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to the funeral where my brother publicly accused my daughter of stealing the family inheritance, without realizing our mother left behind a secret that could destroy the entire family. The rain outside slammed against the stained glass windows, so hard it sounded like gravel thrown against the church. Ava froze beside me. Her black funeral gloves tightened around the folded memorial program in her lap until the paper bent in half. Somewhere behind us, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice answered. I knew something felt strange. That was the moment I realized Daniel had planned every second of this. Not just the accusation, the timing, the witnesses, the humiliation. Even the weather somehow felt arranged. The chapel smelled like wet coats, candle smoke, lilies, and polished wood. My mother's casket sat beneath the altar surrounded by white roses she would have hated because she always said funeral flowers looked too cheerful for grief. And standing at the podium in his charcoal gray suit, my older brother looked less like a grieving son and more like a politician preparing for a press conference.
Calm.
Controlled. Rehearsed. That scared me more than yelling would have. Because angry people lose control. Controlled people plan destruction carefully. My name is Elena Whitmore. I'm 46 years old, and for 19 years I worked as a hospice nurse. I have watched people die quietly. I have watched families destroy themselves loudly. I thought I understood what greed looked like. Then my brother tried to have my daughter arrested at our mother's funeral. And that was only the beginning. Daniel adjusted the microphone slowly. Static crackled through the chapel ceiling. Father Brennan stood awkwardly beside him near the altar, clutching a folded prayer card like he regretted agreeing to any of this. I didn't want to do this today, Daniel said softly. That sentence alone told me he absolutely did. Ava lowered her eyes. She was 22 years old, wearing black heels she hated and the pearl earrings my mother gave her last Christmas. The same pearl earrings Daniel had once called far too expensive for a college girl. My daughter looked exhausted, not guilty.
Exhausted.
For 11 months, she cared for my mother while ovarian cancer hollowed her body out one painful piece at a time. She cooked for her, bathed her, sat beside her through morphine confusion at 3 a.m, read mystery novels aloud when Mom's eyesight failed, held her hand during chemo, and now my brother was turning all of that into evidence against her. Daniel gestured toward a man sitting 3 pews behind him. Gray suit, brown leather folder, cheap tie. The man stood slowly. My name is Martin Keller, he announced. I represent concerns regarding the Whitmore estate. There it was. Not grief. Not loss. Not mourning. Estate. Money. Exactly what this funeral had really become. Ava's breathing became shallow beside me. I placed my hand gently over hers. Her fingers were freezing. Daniel continued carefully. In our mother's final months, Ava isolated Evelyn from family communication and exerted significant influence over financial decisions. Gasps spread across the chapel. Actual gasps. My Aunt Lorraine shook her head dramatically. Cynthia stared at the floor. And Daniel looked directly at my daughter while saying the next sentence. We believe undue influence played a role in the inheritance changes. Undue influence. Legal language. Prepared language. My stomach tightened. This wasn't grief talking. This was strategy. Daniel wanted witnesses. Public witnesses. People who would remember seeing Ava accused inside a church. Because accusations don't need proof once enough people hear them. That's what manipulative people understand better than anyone. Ava finally looked at him. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Daniel sighed like a disappointed father. Ava, this doesn't have to become ugly. That sentence nearly made me laugh. Become ugly? He had interrupted his own mother's funeral to accuse his niece of fraud in front of a chapel full of mourners. Ugly had already arrived. The rain intensified outside. Thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the church walls. Martin Keller opened his legal folder. I have preliminary documents prepared regarding an estate review, he announced.
Prepared.
Of course he did. I looked around the chapel slowly. Most people wouldn't understand what was really happening yet. But I did. This wasn't about investigation. It was about pressure, embarrassment,
Fear.
Daniel believed if he publicly cornered Ava badly enough, she would surrender part of the inheritance just to make the humiliation stop. And maybe that plan would have worked on someone else. Maybe. But Daniel made one mistake. He underestimated how much I had prepared for this exact moment. Because 3 nights earlier, I found something hidden inside my mother's bedroom closet. A black leather notebook. And inside that notebook was enough information to destroy my brother completely. Daniel looked toward Martin again. Martin removed several papers from a folder. I believe it would be appropriate, Martin began carefully, for Ava Whitmore to voluntarily suspend estate transfer proceedings until concerns regarding coercion can be properly investigated. There it was. The real goal. Delay the inheritance. Create fear. Force negotiation. Ava looked terrified now. Humiliation had turned her face pale. I leaned toward her carefully. Don't say another word, I whispered. She looked at me.
Confused.
Shaking.
Trusting me anyway.
Then the chapel doors opened. The sound echoed through the church. Every head turned. Rain blew inward across the stone floor as a tall man stepped inside, carrying a silver briefcase. Daniel's face lost all color instantly. That alone told me everything. Richard Halpern closed the chapel doors calmly behind him. Then he removed his gloves 1 finger at a time. 6'2", gray at the temples. Dark navy overcoat damp with rain. And carrying the silver briefcase I had been waiting for. The chapel went silent. Even Martin Keller stopped talking. Richard walked slowly down the aisle. Measured steps. Unhurried. Like a man entering exactly the room he expected to find. Daniel swallowed hard. I noticed because my brother almost never showed fear publicly. But fear has tells. Tiny ones. A tightening jaw. Rigid shoulders. Hands suddenly too still. After 19 years in hospice care, I learned how to recognize fear before people admitted it themselves. Richard reached our pew. Without speaking, he placed the silver briefcase beside his polished shoes. Then he looked directly at Daniel. Daniel looked away first. Father Brennan cleared his throat awkwardly. Sir, this is a private funeral service. Richard adjusted his glasses calmly.
No, he said.
It stopped being private the moment legal accusations were made. Whispers exploded instantly. Aunt Lorraine looked confused. Cynthia looked panicked. Martin Keller suddenly seemed much less confident. That was when I finally stood. My black dress brushed softly against the pew as I turned toward the chapel. 43 people watched me. Some curious. Some embarrassed. Some already regretting the assumptions they made about my daughter 5 minutes earlier. And my brother stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him anymore. Funny, I said quietly. He brought someone too. A nervous laugh escaped somewhere in the back pews. Daniel recovered fast. Too fast. This isn't necessary, he snapped. Richard ignored him completely. Instead, he unclasped the silver briefcase carefully and removed a thin folder. Richard Halpern, he announced calmly. Financial litigation attorney. Martin Keller's face tightened immediately. And Daniel's wife Cynthia suddenly looked like she might faint. Interesting. Very interesting. Richard continued. Before accusations continue publicly against Miss Ava Whitmore, there are several financial irregularities involving Evelyn Whitmore's accounts that should also be discussed. The entire chapel shifted emotionally in that instant. The energy changed. You could actually feel it. People leaned forward. Curiosity replaced judgment. Daniel stepped away from the podium. "What exactly is this?" he demanded. Richard opened the folder. "Suspicious withdrawals," he replied calmly. "From Evelyn Whitmore's personal accounts during hospice care." Complete silence. I looked directly at my brother. And for the first time that morning, Daniel looked afraid. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not anger.
Fear.
Martin Keller cleared his throat. "I'm sure there's an explanation." "Oh," Richard replied calmly. "I'm counting on one." Ava looked up at me slowly.
Confused.
Hopeful. Still shaking. I squeezed her hand once. Very gently. Because this was the moment everything began changing. Daniel tried smiling again.
It looked painful now.
"You're seriously doing this here?" he asked me. I met his eyes evenly. "No," I said quietly. "I'm ending it here." Thunder cracked outside, so loudly several people jumped. Rain streamed down the stained glass windows behind the altar. And Richard Halpern slowly removed a small digital recorder from inside the silver briefcase. Daniel lunged forward instantly. "Don't." The entire chapel froze. Richard held the recorder carefully between two fingers. "You recognize it?" he asked. Daniel stopped moving. Too late. Way too late. Because guilty people always react before innocent people understand the accusation. Cynthia suddenly whispered something under her breath, then covered her mouth immediately. Richard looked toward her. Interesting again. Very interesting. Father Brennan stepped down from the altar, completely now. Even he understood this funeral had transformed into something else entirely. Something dangerous. Richard placed the recorder carefully atop the casket flowers. "My office received this device 2 weeks ago," he said calmly, "along with documented concerns from Evelyn Whitmore regarding financial misconduct involving her accounts." Gasps spread again, this time louder. Daniel's composure began cracking visibly around the edges. "You can't play private recordings publicly," Martin Keller argued. Richard looked at him calmly. "The recordings become highly relevant when someone publicly accuses the legal beneficiary of fraud during a funeral service." Martin opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he knew Richard was right. Ava whispered beside me, "What's happening?" I kept my eyes on Daniel. "The truth," I answered softly. Richard pressed one button. Static crackled softly through the recorder speaker. Then my mother's voice filled the chapel.
Weak.
Fragile, but unmistakable. "If you're listening to this," Evelyn Whitmore said slowly, "then Daniel has finally done what I was afraid he would do." The room stopped breathing. Even the rain outside seemed quieter somehow. Ava covered her mouth instantly. Daniel stared at the recorder like it had become a loaded weapon. My mother continued, "I know my son better than anyone, and I know desperation changes people." Daniel stepped backward slowly. "No," he whispered. Richard said nothing. He simply let the recording continue. "Ava stayed with me because she loved me," my mother's voice said. "The others stayed interested in what I owned." Aunt Lorraine's face drained white. Cynthia began crying quietly. And Daniel looked like a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. Then my mother said the sentence that shattered whatever remained of his control. "I was afraid of my own son." The chapel erupted into whispers instantly. Father Brennan crossed himself. Martin Keller looked physically uncomfortable now. And Ava broke down beside me silently. Not loud sobbing. Just tears finally escaping after weeks of pressure and humiliation. Daniel suddenly moved toward Richard again. "Turn it off." Richard didn't move. Instead, my mother's voice continued filling the church. "If anything happens after my death regarding the inheritance, investigate Daniel's financial situation." That landed like a grenade. Cynthia looked at Daniel sharply. And that was when everything changed. Because Cynthia whispered the sentence she clearly never meant to say aloud. "You told me the recordings were gone." Silence. Absolute silence. Daniel turned toward his wife slowly. Horror spread across his face.
Pure horror.
Because one careless sentence had just confirmed everything. Richard closed the recorder gently. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rain hammered against the church roof hard enough to shake the chandeliers overhead. And standing there beside my mother's casket, watching my brother unravel publicly in front of 43 stunned mourners, I realized this funeral was no longer about grief. It was about exposure. And we were only getting started. By the time Ava and I reached my mother's house, the rain had softened into a cold drizzle. Not peaceful rain. Exhausted rain. The kind that arrives after something terrible finally says what it came to say. Neither of us spoke during the drive. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in heavy silence, while St. Andrew's Chapel disappeared farther behind us mile by mile. Ava sat curled against the passenger door staring out the window. Still wearing the pearl earrings.
Still pale.
Still trying to understand how a funeral had turned into a public execution. Or almost turned into one. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as we pulled onto Maple Drive. The yellow porch light was still on. Mom always left it on after sunset. Even during chemo. Even during the worst nights. She used to say darkness felt heavier when nobody was waiting for you. Now, the house waited anyway. Empty. Still. Frozen in time. I parked beside the curb. For a moment neither of us moved. The rain tapped softly against the roof. Ava finally whispered. I can still hear Grandma's voice. That nearly broke me. Because I could too. I could still hear the weakness in her breathing from that recording. The exhaustion. The fear she tried hiding from everyone. Especially me. I turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Ava asked the question I had been avoiding since the chapel. Did you know about the recording? I stared through the windshield for several seconds before answering. No, I admitted quietly. But I knew your grandmother was preparing for something. Ava turned toward me slowly. What does that mean? I looked at the house. At the dark second-floor window above the kitchen. Mom's bedroom. There were things she stopped saying out loud near the end. I answered. But she started writing everything down. Ava frowned slightly. What things? I opened the car door. That, I said quietly, is what we're about to find out. The front porch creaked beneath our shoes as we climbed the steps. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold soil. I unlocked the door carefully. And the moment we stepped inside, grief hit me harder than it had all day. Not at the funeral. Not at the cemetery. Here. Inside the quiet. The house still smelled like my mother's lavender lotion and cinnamon tea. A knitted blanket remained folded neatly across the couch arm. Her reading glasses sat beside the lamp exactly where she left them. One slipper remained near the recliner, the other beneath the coffee table, as if she might walk back in looking for them. Ava stood silently beside the doorway. I could see her fighting tears again. Some things do not need words. And grief inside a familiar room is one of them. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked softly through the silence.
Every sound felt too loud now.
The refrigerator humming. Floorboards shifting. Rainwater dripping from our coats onto hardwood. Life continuing when someone important no longer could. I removed my shoes slowly. Then I looked toward the hallway leading to Mom's bedroom. The notebook is upstairs, I said. Ava looked confused. What notebook? I met her eyes carefully. The reason your uncle looked terrified when Richard opened that briefcase. We climbed the staircase together slowly. The hallway light flickered once before settling. Mom always meant to fix that bulb. Never got around to it. Her bedroom door remained half open. The scent inside nearly stopped me cold. Lavender.
Dust.
Old books. And faint traces of hospital antiseptic still lingering from the final months. Ava stepped inside carefully. The bed remained perfectly made. The floral curtains hung motionless beside the rain-streaked windows. And on the dresser sat Mom's jewelry box. Black cedar wood. Polished smooth with age. Ava stared at it immediately. She kept your grandfather's watch in there, she whispered. I nodded slowly. She kept everything important in there. I crossed the room quietly and knelt beside the closet. Then I reached behind a stack of folded blankets on the top shelf and pulled out the black leather notebook. Ava's eyes widened slightly. It looked ordinary. That was the frightening part. Just a worn black notebook held together by an elastic band. No label.
No marquines.
But inside it was war. I sat carefully on the edge of Mom's bed and opened it. The first page was written entirely in my mother's handwriting.
Neat.
Precise. Controlled. If Daniel asks questions, do not trust the tears first. Ava read over my shoulder. Her breathing slowed. Page after page filled the notebook.
Dates.
Bank transfers. Phone calls. Conversations. Amounts withdrawn from accounts. License plate numbers. Names. Everything. My mother documented everything. Not emotionally. Strategically. Like a woman quietly preparing for a storm she knew nobody else could see yet. Ava sat beside me carefully. Oh my God. I turned another page. March 8th. Daniel arrived after midnight asking about power of attorney paperwork. April 14th. Cynthia searched office drawers while believing I was asleep. May 2nd. Lorraine asked whether Ava had access to passwords. My stomach tightened harder with every line. Mom knew. Not pieces of it. All of it. The manipulation. The greed. The planning. And she had been documenting the entire thing alone. Ava suddenly pointed toward a section near the bottom of one page. Mom. I looked closer. There, written carefully beneath several account numbers, was one sentence underlined twice. If something happens before I can finish this, Richard will know where the second file is. Second file. Ava looked at me slowly. What second file? I turned the page quickly, then stopped. My pulse slowed instantly. Several pages were missing. Not torn randomly. Removed carefully. Clean cuts near the spine. Razor cuts. Someone had intentionally removed them. Ava saw it too. Those pages were taken. The room suddenly felt colder. I flipped farther ahead. More missing pages. Not many, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to terrify me. Because whoever removed them knew exactly what they were searching for. And suddenly I remembered something Daniel said at the funeral. Not the accusation. Something smaller. Something I almost ignored. He had mentioned Mom changing the will unexpectedly. Unexpectedly. As if he already knew details nobody publicly disclosed yet. My chest tightened. Someone had been inside this house before the funeral. I stood immediately. Ava looked startled. What is it? I walked quickly toward Mom's office down the hall. The room smelled like old paper and coffee grounds. Rain tapped against the windows while I searched the desk drawers. Nothing looked disturbed at first. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. Then I noticed the filing cabinet. Second drawer. Slightly crooked. Barely noticeable. I opened it carefully. Inside, several folders sat unevenly stacked. Someone had gone through them quickly. Not enough to make a mess. Just enough to search. Ava whispered behind me, Mom. I looked toward the desk calendar hanging near the wall. One date circled in red. 3 days before the funeral. That same date appeared again inside the notebook beside one sentence. He came back after midnight. Ava slowly stepped backward. You think Uncle Daniel came here? I know he did. Thunder rolled somewhere outside. The house groaned softly around us. And for the first time since the funeral ended, I realized the story was much bigger than inheritance money. Much bigger. Because people do not sneak into dead women's houses searching for documents unless they are terrified of what those documents contain. Ava folded her arms tightly around herself. What exactly was Grandma hiding? I stared at the missing pages again. Then at the sentence mentioning the second file. And deep in my chest, something cold settled into place. Whatever my mother discovered before she died, someone was still trying to bury it. The next morning, I barely slept 2 hours. Rainwater still clung to the maple trees outside Mom's kitchen window while dawn spread gray light across the counters. Ava sat wrapped in one of my mother's old cardigans drinking untouched tea. Neither of us looked rested. The black notebook remained open on the table between us. Like evidence. Like a warning. I reread the missing page sections 3 times before something finally clicked.
Dates.
Patterns. Locations. Mom wasn't just documenting suspicious behavior. She was tracking movements. Specific movements. My eyes stopped on one line. June 17th. Alarm activated 1:12 a.m., deactivated 1:19 a.m. Another. August 3rd. Side entrance left unsecured. Then another. He thought I was asleep upstairs. I slowly lowered the notebook. Ava noticed immediately.
What?
I looked toward the hallway. Your grandmother kept security logs. Ava blinked. For the house. I nodded once. She installed the system after chemotherapy started. Because treatment made her weak, vulnerable, afraid. And suddenly I knew exactly where to look. The security panel sat inside the laundry room near the garage entrance. I opened the small metal cabinet carefully. Inside was the digital system monitor.
Old.
Dusty. Still functioning. I entered Mom's birthday. Nothing. Then Ava quietly said, "Try Grandpa's." The screen unlocked instantly. I exhaled slowly. System logs appeared row after row.
Door entries.
Alarm activations. Late night movement. And there it was. 3 nights before the funeral. Garage door entry. 12:43 a.m. Alarm bypassed manually.
Exit 1:26 a.m.
No emergency trigger. No police alert. Whoever entered knew the code. Ava whispered, "Oh my God." I kept scrolling. Same entry pattern appeared twice more over the previous month. Always after midnight. Always brief. Always through the garage. Daniel. It had to be. But another detail bothered me. The system recorded 2 entries during the funeral week. Not 1.
2.
I stared at the second timestamp carefully. 2 nights before the funeral. 11:18 p.m. Someone entered again. Stayed 11 minutes. Left.
Fast.
Different from Daniel's earlier searches. This person already knew what they wanted. Ava looked over my shoulder. Could it have been Cynthia? Maybe. But something about the timing felt wrong. Too careful. Too precise. I closed the panel slowly. We need to know what was in those missing notebook pages. Ava looked toward the office nervously. And if whoever took them comes back? I met her eyes calmly. They won't. You sound sure. Because now they know we've noticed. That silence afterwards said enough. Fear changes behavior. And whoever searched this house was definitely afraid. Around noon, I walked next door through wet grass toward Mrs. Delaney's porch. She had lived beside my mother for almost 27 years. Nothing happened on Maple Drive without her noticing. The old woman opened the door before I knocked twice. "Elena," she said softly. "I heard about the funeral." I nodded once. "Can I ask you something?" Her expression shifted immediately. "Yes." "Did you see anyone around Mom's house before the funeral?" Mrs. Delaney hesitated. Too long. Then she stepped aside quietly. "Come inside." That alone made my stomach tighten. Her house smelled like coffee and old newspapers. A television murmured softly in another room. She lowered herself carefully into a recliner before speaking again. "3 nights before the funeral," she said quietly, "I saw Daniel." My pulse slowed instantly. He parked down the street instead of the driveway. Of course he did. He went into the garage around midnight. Was he alone? Mrs. Delaney frowned slightly. At first I thought yes. At first. I leaned forward. "What changed your mind?" She adjusted her glasses nervously. "When he left, someone else was already sitting in the passenger seat. Ava and I exchanged a look instantly. Could you see who?" "No," she admitted. "But it looked like a woman." "Woman. Not Cynthia. Too short. Different hair. Different posture." Something cold moved through my chest again. "Lorraine. Maybe. Or someone else entirely." Mrs. Delaney continued quietly. "They left fast." Daniel looked upset. Upset how? Like someone who didn't find what he came for. The room fell silent. Then Mrs. Delaney said something that changed everything again. Elena, there's more. I looked at her carefully. The morning after they came, your mother's office light was on. Ava frowned, but Grandma was already gone. Mrs. Delaney nodded slowly. That's why I noticed it. A chill spread across my arms. Someone returned after Daniel left. Someone else entered that office. Alone. Searching. I thanked Mrs. Delaney and walked back through the drizzle with Ava beside me. Neither of us spoke until we reached the porch. Then Ava stopped suddenly. What if Grandma knew more than she wrote down? I looked at her. She did. How do you know? I thought about the sentence inside the notebook.
Richard will know where the second file is.
Then I remembered something else. Mom always believed in backups. Duplicates. Copies hidden inside copies. Years working hospice made her paranoid about people rewriting truth after death. I turned toward the house slowly. There's something else here. Ava looked nervous. What? I don't know yet. But deep down, I was starting to realize my mother had designed this entire situation carefully. Not just to expose Daniel. To survive him. That night the storm returned. Thunder shook the windows hard enough to rattle dishes inside the cabinets. Ava searched the office again while I reread the notebook beside the fireplace. Hours passed. Nothing. Then around 11:40 p.m., Ava suddenly called from the hallway. Mom. Her voice sounded wrong. Sharp. Uneasy. I stood immediately. She was kneeling beside the office desk drawer holding a tiny silver key. I found this taped underneath. The key looked old. Bank key. Safety deposit box. My pulse quickened. Ava stared at it. You think this is connected? I already knew it was. The next morning, Richard Halpern met us outside First National Bank downtown. The clouds still hung low over the city. Everything smelled wet and metallic. Richard listened silently while I explained the notebook, the missing pages, the alarm logs, and the key. He remained calm the entire time.
Too calm.
Finally, he said, Your mother contacted me 6 months ago. Ava and I both looked at him. She suspected financial fraud involving Daniel, Richard continued. But she was worried about something bigger. What bigger? Richard hesitated. She believed someone inside the family was helping him. Ava crossed her arms tightly.
Who?
That, Richard said quietly, is what she was trying to prove before she died. We entered the bank together. The lobby smelled like marble floors and printer toner. A young bank manager led us downstairs into the vault area. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls. Cold air hummed through the underground room. The manager took the silver key carefully, then frowned. That box was already accessed. My heartbeat slowed instantly. When? The manager checked his tablet. 48 hours ago. Silence. Ava looked pale again. Richard stepped forward carefully. Who accessed it? The manager hesitated. I can't disclose names without legal authorization. Richard showed his credentials immediately. The manager's expression changed. Then he lowered his voice. It was accessed by an approved secondary contact. I felt sick before he even finished speaking. Daniel Whitmore. Ava whispered.
No.
The manager continued quietly. The box was emptied completely. Everything inside me went still.
Too still.
Because now we knew for certain. Daniel wasn't guessing anymore. He knew exactly what he was searching for. And worse, he had probably found it. Richard looked at me carefully. But I already understood what this meant. Whatever my mother hid inside that deposit box was important enough for someone to risk everything trying to erase it. And if Daniel had it now, then this story was about to become far more dangerous than any of us expected. 3 nights later, Aunt Lorraine invited us to dinner. That alone told me something was wrong. Because Lorraine never invited people anywhere unless she wanted something. The text arrived at 9:14 that morning. Family needs healing. Your mother would hate this division. Please come tonight. Daniel will not cause problems. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then Ava looked up from the couch. What is it? I handed her the phone. She read the message once and immediately shook her head.
No.
I know. She's setting something up. Yes. Ava crossed her arms tightly. Then, why are you thinking about going? Because traps work both ways. I didn't say that aloud, but I felt it immediately. Daniel was nervous now. People only push reconciliation suddenly when exposure starts closing in around them. That meant pressure, desperation, mistakes. And desperate people always reveal more than careful ones. By 6 o'clock that evening, rain had returned again. Not violent this time.
Steady. Cold.
The kind that makes streetlights blur through car windows. Lorraine's house sat at the end of Briarwood Lane, glowing warm with yellow light. Too warm. Too inviting. Like a staged photograph pretending everything inside was normal. Ava adjusted her black sweater nervously before we stepped onto the porch. "Promise me something," she whispered. "What?" "If this turns ugly again, we leave immediately." I looked at her carefully. "I promise." Lorraine opened the door, smiling too quickly. "Elena," she breathed dramatically. "Thank God." The smell of roast chicken and wine filled the hallway. Soft jazz played somewhere in the background. Everything looked painfully normal, which meant absolutely nothing inside this house was normal tonight. The dining room table was already set. 7 plates. 7 wine glasses. Daniel sat near the far end beside Cynthia. The moment Ava saw him, her shoulders stiffened instantly. Daniel stood slowly. He looked terrible. Dark circles beneath his eyes. Wrinkled shirt collar. Unshaven jaw. Not sleeping. Good. But his voice remained carefully controlled. "Ava." She didn't answer. Lorraine rushed awkwardly between us. "We're family," she insisted brightly. "Tonight isn't about fighting." That was the second lie she told within 30 seconds. Because nobody organizes peace dinners during active legal investigations unless they're trying to manage damage. I noticed Richard's warning echoing in my head immediately. Someone inside the family helped him. Cynthia wouldn't meet my eyes. Interesting again. Very interesting. Dinner began stiffly. Silverware clinked softly against plates while rain tapped the windows. Nobody mentioned the funeral for nearly 15 minutes. That silence itself felt unnatural. Then Lorraine finally sighed dramatically. "Your mother would hate seeing us like this." There it was. Emotional guilt. Exactly on schedule. Daniel stared into his wine glass. "I never wanted any of this." I nearly laughed. Instead, I took a slow sip of water. Ava barely touched her food. Lorraine turned toward her carefully. "You know your uncle loved your grandmother too." Ava finally looked up. "So, why did he accuse me publicly?" Lorraine hesitated. "People say things when they're grieving."
No.
"People reveal things when they're desperate." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Ava, I was trying to protect Grandma's wishes." That sentence chilled me instantly. Because manipulative people always frame greed as morality. Ava's voice stayed surprisingly calm. "Grandma recorded herself saying she was afraid of you." Cynthia flinched visibly. Daniel noticed. His jaw tightened. "There are things you don't understand," he said quietly. I finally spoke. "Then explain them." Silence. Rain hit the windows harder. Lorraine rushed to interrupt. "We don't need another fight.
No. Ian suara tabanli.
We need honesty." Daniel looked at me for several seconds. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger. Calculation. "You really think you knew everything about Mom?" That question landed strangely. Too specific. I leaned back slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniel smiled faintly.
Small.
Cruel. 12 months before she died, Mom changed more than her will. Ava looked confused. "What does that mean?" Daniel took another sip of wine slowly. "She hid things from you too." My stomach tightened instantly. Because part of me believed him. Not the manipulation. Not the cruelty. But the possibility that Mom had hidden additional truths. Daniel watched my reaction carefully.
He saw it land.
Good manipulators watch emotional damage happen in real time. And suddenly, I realized this dinner wasn't about reconciliation at all. It was about destabilizing us, making us doubt, confusing timelines, creating emotional fog. Classic pressure tactics. Cynthia suddenly stood. I need some air. She left the dining room too quickly. Daniel watched her leave with visible irritation. Interesting. Very interesting. Ava leaned toward me slightly. She's scared. I know. Minutes later, Cynthia returned carrying fresh napkins. Her eyes looked red. She placed one beside my plate carefully. Too carefully. Then moved away immediately. I looked down slowly. Folded inside the napkin was a handwritten note. 5 words. He's hiding another account. My pulse slowed instantly. I kept my face completely neutral. Ava noticed the folded paper near my hand. I covered it casually. Daniel was still talking. All I wanted was fairness. Fairness. The man who secretly emptied safety deposit boxes was talking about fairness. I looked toward Cynthia carefully. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Fear radiated off her now, not guilt.
Fear.
And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Cynthia wasn't protecting Daniel anymore. She was afraid of him. That realization changed everything. Because scared people eventually talk. And when they do, entire stories collapse. The rain started again just after midnight. Not heavy at first. Just soft taps against the kitchen windows of Evelyn Whitmore's house while Ava sat curled beneath a blanket on the couch, staring at the black notebook spread open across the coffee table. The lamp beside her cast a warm amber glow across the pages.
Dates.
Phone numbers. Bank references. Tiny handwritten notes in Evelyn's narrow cursive. And one name circled 3 times. Lorraine. I stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. Ava looked up slowly. I didn't want it to be her. Neither did I. Aunt Lorraine had been at every family birthday since I was 6 years old. She baked cinnamon bread every Christmas. She hugged too tightly, smiled too easily, and apparently forged hospice authorization forms while my mother was dying. Funny how betrayal always looked harmless right before it destroyed something. I handed Ava the coffee and sat beside her. The clock in the hallway ticked softly. The house felt colder now. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the walls themselves knew the truth had finally entered the room. Richard arrived 20 minutes later carrying another stack of documents beneath his arm. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the hardwood floor. He shut the front door carefully behind him. I got the handwriting comparison back. The room went silent. Ava sat up straighter. Richard laid 3 folders on the coffee table. 1 sample from Daniel, he said. 1 from Evelyn. Then he slid the 3rd folder forward. 1 from Lorraine. I felt something twist in my chest before he even opened it. Richard removed the analysis pages slowly, methodically, the way surgeons uncover bad news. The forged hospice authorization forms match Lorraine's handwriting characteristics. Ava blinked.
No.
Richard nodded once. The pressure patterns, upward slants, spacing habits, signature rhythm, all consistent. I stared at the pages. Lorraine. Not Daniel. Not Cynthia. Lorraine. The woman who spent the funeral telling everyone family should stay united. The woman who cried the loudest in church. The woman who hugged Ava after Daniel publicly accused her. I leaned back slowly. She manipulated the church members too. Richard looked at me. What? At the funeral, I said quietly. She was moving through the pews before everything started, whispering to people. Ava's face changed. Oh my God. What? She came to Grandma's house 3 days before she died. I turned toward her. What? Ava swallowed hard. She brought soup. The room suddenly felt very small. She asked Grandma to sign something, Ava whispered. Grandma refused. Richard's eyes narrowed. What exactly did she say? Ava closed her eyes, trying to remember. She said, this would make things easier for everyone after you're gone. Silence. Then Richard spoke quietly. She was setting up the transfer before Evelyn even died. The rain intensified outside. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. And suddenly, every smile Lorraine had ever given me felt fake. Ava stared at the notebook again. There's more. I looked down. She pointed toward another line buried between account numbers. Lorraine picked up documents. Don't trust her with keys. My stomach dropped. She had access to the house. Richard nodded slowly. That explains the missing pages. I stood up too fast. The room tilted slightly. She searched the house before the funeral. And probably emptied the safety deposit box, Richard said. Ava's voice cracked. Why would she do this? Nobody answered right away. Because greed never announces itself honestly. It disguises itself as concern, as loyalty, as family. That was the real horror of people like Lorraine. They poison things quietly. Richard pulled out his phone. I'm contacting the sheriff's department. But before he could dial, Ava's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. Then her face drained of color. What is it? Ava looked up slowly. It's Lorraine. The room froze. Richard held out his hand immediately. Put it on speaker. Ava answered carefully. Hello. Lorraine's voice came soft and shaky through the speaker. Ava, sweetheart, where's your mother? I stepped closer. I'm here. A pause. Then Lorraine sighed. I need to explain. Richard mouthed one word. Record. Ava quickly tapped the audio app. I crossed my arms. Explain what? More silence. Rain hammered the windows now. Finally, Lorraine spoke again. Daniel told me your mother changed the will because she was confused. That's a lie. I know that now. Her voice cracked. I didn't know what he was planning. I almost laughed. You forged hospice documents. No. Daniel told me they were insurance papers. You expect me to believe that? I was trying to help him. There it was. Not innocence. Not confusion. Desperation. The same poison wearing different clothes. Lorraine started crying softly. He said he'd lose everything. Ava looked sick. Richard stayed expressionless. I leaned closer to the phone. So you helped him steal from a dying woman? No. You helped him try to destroy my daughter. Lorraine's breathing became shaky. You don't understand what Daniel was like these last few months. Then she said something that changed the entire room. He wasn't the one moving the money. Silence. Richard straightened instantly. What? I said Daniel wasn't moving the money himself. Every nerve in my body tightened. Who was? Lorraine didn't answer immediately. Then, the call disconnected. Ava stared at the phone. No. Richard grabbed his coat instantly. We need to move. Move where? He looked at me sharply. If Lorraine's talking, Daniel's going to panic. Thunder exploded outside. And suddenly the entire story shifted again. That was when everything changed. The storage facility sat on the edge of Millbrook beside an abandoned lumber yard. Rain poured sideways across the cracked pavement as Richard parked beneath a flickering security light. The place looked forgotten.
Rush-stained doors.
Broken fencing. Dark puddles reflecting lightning flashes. Ava stayed in the back seat, clutching the black notebook against her chest. I turned toward her. You stay in the car.
No.
Ava. I'm done being protected from this. Her voice surprised me. Not weak. Not emotional.
Steady.
Like something inside her had hardened during the funeral. Richard glanced toward the storage rows. We don't have much time. Cynthia had called 20 minutes earlier.
Crying. Panicked.
Daniel rented a second storage unit under a fake business name. Unit 214. He's going there tonight, she whispered. Then she hung up. Now we stood in the storm staring at row after row of metal doors while thunder rolled overhead like distant artillery. Richard found Unit 214 near the back corner. A heavy lock hung from the latch. But something was wrong. The lock wasn't fully closed. Richard noticed it too. He's here. Ava stepped closer. The rain soaked her coat instantly. I grabbed her arm. Stay behind me. Richard carefully lifted the latch. The metal door groaned upward. Darkness. Then the smell hit us. Burned paper.
Mold. Dust.
A flashlight beam cut through the black. Boxes. Plastic bins. Furniture wrapped in stained sheets. And someone standing very still at the back of the unit. Ava gasped softly. The figure stepped forward into the light. Cynthia. Her mascara had streaked down both cheeks. She looked exhausted, terrified, and completely broken. I didn't know where else to go.
I ser det her.
Where's Daniel? I don't know. Richard scanned the room quickly. What's in here? Cynthia looked around like seeing it clearly for the first time. Everything. Lightning flashed outside. And that was when we saw it. Stacks of shredded documents scattered across the concrete floor. Burned photographs in a metal barrel. Financial ledgers. Old bank statements. 3 desktop hard drives. And sitting on a folding table near the back wall, a second recorder. Ava moved toward it slowly. My chest tightened.
No.
But she already picked it up. A small silver digital recorder. Same brand Richard had played at the funeral. Same type Evelyn used for hospice journals. A sticky note sat attached to it. For Ava. The room went silent. Even the storm outside suddenly felt far away. Ava's hands trembled. Richard took the recorder carefully. Don't touch anything else. Cynthia wrapped her arms around herself. He was going to destroy all of it tonight. Destroy what? She pointed toward a stack of folders. The revised will. I froze. Richard opened the nearest folder immediately. Inside sat unsigned legal drafts, page after page. One sentence repeated throughout every version. Evelyn Whitmore declared mentally incompetent. Ava looked sick. He planned this before Grandma even died. Cynthia nodded weakly. He said if he couldn't control the will legally, he'd destroy her credibility. My stomach turned. That kind of cruelty didn't happen suddenly. It grew slowly, quietly, like mold inside walls. Richard continued searching the folders. Then he stopped. His face darkened. What? He held up another document. Offshore transfer records. Amounts totaling nearly $400,000. I stared at the numbers. That's impossible. No, Richard said quietly. It's not. Ava looked between us. What does that mean? Richard exhaled slowly. Your grandmother had more money than anyone knew. Lightning flashed again. Thunder shook the walls. And suddenly footsteps echoed outside the unit. All 4 of us froze. Someone was approaching. Slowly, deliberately. A shadow crossed the rain outside. Then another. Richard stepped in front of Ava immediately. The footsteps stopped directly outside the storage unit. Silence. Then, the metal door slammed downward. Darkness swallowed the room. Ava screamed. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The storm outside roared against the metal walls while darkness swallowed the storage unit completely. Then Richard's flashlight snapped back on. The beam shook slightly in his hand. Stay calm. Ava grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Mom. I'm here. Richard moved toward the door cautiously. The latch rattled from outside. Someone had chained it shut. Cynthia started crying again. Oh God. Richard tested the door once. Locked. Thunder cracked overhead. The flashlight beams swept across the room again. The shredded documents. The burned photographs. The silver recorder. Then Richard's eyes narrowed suddenly. There's another exit. He pointed toward the back wall where a smaller utility door sat half-hidden behind stacked boxes. We rushed toward it. Richard shoved the door open. Cold rain exploded against us instantly. We emerged behind the facility, beside an overgrown drainage ditch. No one was there. Just darkness. Storm. And tire tracks disappearing into the rain. Ava hugged herself tightly. Was that Daniel? Richard looked toward the road. Maybe. But I noticed something else. Fear. Not anger. Not confidence. Fear. Daniel was running out of moves. And desperate people became dangerous when cornered. We drove straight to Richard's office. None of us spoke much during the ride. Ava sat in the back seat staring at the silver recorder in her lap, like it might explode. Rain streaked across the windows. Streetlights blurred gold against the glass. The whole town fell asleep while our family collapsed in slow motion behind closed doors. Richard unlocked his office at 1:13 a.m. The building smelled like old paper and coffee. Safe, quiet, almost painfully normal compared to the chaos surrounding us. Cynthia stayed near the door, wringing her hands together. I never wanted this. Nobody answered, because intentions meant very little after enough damage. Richard placed the silver recorder carefully on his desk. For Ava. Those two words suddenly felt heavier than anything else in the room. Ava sat across from him slowly. I don't know if I can hear this.
You sat beside her.
Yes, you can. Richard pressed play. Static crackled softly. Then Evelyn's voice filled the office.
Weak.
Tired, but unmistakably clear. If you're hearing this, sweetheart, then things got ugly after I left. Ava covered her mouth instantly. Tears filled her eyes. I hoped they wouldn't. A long pause crackled through the speakers. But people do strange things when money mixes with regret. Richard lowered his gaze respectfully. Evelyn continued. Daniel was always afraid. I felt my chest tighten. Not angry. Not cruel at first. Afraid. Rain tapped softly against Richard's office windows. He spent his whole life trying to prove he deserved more than everyone else. Ava's shoulders shook quietly beside me. I think somewhere along the way he confused love with ownership. Silence filled the recording for several seconds. Then Evelyn sighed softly. I knew he was stealing. Cynthia burst into tears. Richard stayed still. I couldn't breathe properly. I knew about the withdrawals, the forged papers, the lies. Ava whispered softly, Grandma, but I also knew something else. The tape crackled. He would destroy himself eventually. I closed my eyes, because deep down, I think Evelyn had understood her son better than any of us. He thought money would fix the emptiness inside him. A long pause. It won't. Thunder rolled faintly outside. Then Evelyn's voice softened further. Ava, you stayed. Ava completely broke then. Tears streamed down her face, silently. You brushed my hair when my hands hurt too much to hold the brush. I felt tears sting my own eyes. You read to me when I couldn't sleep. Richard looked away respectfully. And every night you kissed my forehead before turning off the lamp. Ava covered her face. I wasn't afraid to die because of you. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Then Evelyn said something that shattered the entire story open. There's one more thing. Richard straightened slightly. The Whitmore Trust was never emptied. I looked up sharply.
What?
There's another account Daniel never found. Ava blinked through tears. A trust. Evelyn gave a tiny laugh on the recording. Your grandfather was smarter than all of us. Richard grabbed a pen immediately. The trust is hidden under Blackburn Holdings. He wrote quickly. The access documents are inside the piano bench. I stared at the recorder.
Piano bench?
At the lake house. The room froze.
Lake house.
Daniel didn't know about the lake house. Almost nobody did. Evelyn continued softly. I wanted you to have something untouched by greed. Ava looked completely stunned. Then came the final line. And, Elena, my breath caught instantly. You were never the quiet daughter. I closed my eyes. You were the strong one. The recording ended. Static filled the office softly. Nobody spoke for nearly a full minute. Then Cynthia whispered, Oh my God. Richard slowly capped his pen. The trust changes everything. Ava wiped her face shakily. How much money? Richard looked at his notes. Enough to make Daniel panic. And suddenly I understood exactly why someone chained us inside that storage unit. The probate courthouse smelled like wet coats and old wood. Reporters crowded the front steps. Church members whispered beneath umbrellas. Family friends avoided eye contact. And standing near the entrance in a navy suit that suddenly looked 2 sizes too small, Daniel. He looked exhausted. Gray beneath the eyes. Hair disheveled. But still trying to hold himself together through sheer arrogance. Funny how pride survives long after dignity dies. Ava stood beside me clutching the black notebook. She wore Evelyn's pearl earrings again. Not for appearance. For armor. Richard adjusted his tie calmly. This ends today. Daniel noticed us approaching. His jaw tightened immediately. You really brought reporters? I didn't invite them. He stepped closer. Rainwater dripped from his coat collar. You think humiliating me fixes anything? No, I said quietly. The truth fixes things. His eyes flashed with anger. Then suddenly, police sirens echoed outside the courthouse. Everyone turned. A sheriff's vehicle pulled sharply toward the curb, and from the back seat, Lorraine emerged in handcuffs. Gasps spread across the courthouse steps instantly. Daniel went pale. Lorraine looked shattered. Mascara smeared. Hair disheveled. She spotted Daniel immediately. You said they'd never trace the forms. The entire crowd froze. Daniel hissed back furiously. Shut up. Deputies escorted her past reporters while cameras flashed wildly. Richard leaned toward me slightly. That's very bad for him. The courtroom filled quickly after that. Wood benches creaked. Rain hammered softly against the tall windows. Judge Miriam Holloway entered precisely at 9 a.m. Sharp-eyed, unimpressed. The kind of woman who could smell lies before people finished speaking them. Everyone rose. Then the hearing began. Daniel's attorney tried confidence first. The Whitmore estate has been emotionally mishandled. Richard interrupted immediately. With respect, Your Honor, we have evidence of fraud, coercion, forged documentation, unlawful transfers, attempted estate manipulation, and financial concealment. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses slowly. That's quite a list. It gets worse. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside his attorney. Richard approached the evidence table calmly. Then the destruction started. Bank records, forgery reports, security logs, the revised incompetency drafts found in storage, the offshore accounts, the illegal withdrawals. Every piece laid out carefully, methodically, like bricks building a wall around Daniel, one document at a time. Then Cynthia testified. The courtroom became completely silent while she took the stand. She looked terrified, but determined. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Cynthia's voice shook at first, then steadied. He said his mother owed him. She swallowed hard. He said Ava manipulated Evelyn. Richard approached slowly. Did Daniel ever discuss altering the estate before Evelyn Whitmore passed away? Yes. Daniel closed his eyes. Cynthia continued. He planned to challenge her mental competency before the funeral. Gasps spread softly across the courtroom. Judge Holloway's face darkened visibly. Richard played the first recording next. Evelyn's voice filled the courtroom.
Fear.
Disappointment.
Love. Truth.
Every word landed like a hammer. Then came the second recording.
The trust.
The hidden assets. The confession. And finally, the courtroom heard Evelyn say, You were never the quiet daughter. You were the strong one. I looked down immediately, because suddenly crying felt unavoidable. Daniel unraveled after that.
Completely.
He stood up abruptly. She manipulated all of you. Judge Holloway slammed her gavel. Mr. Whitmore, sit down. She turned my mother against me.
Seat. Down.
But Daniel kept going, voice cracking, hands shaking. She always thought Elena was better than me. Silence swallowed the courtroom. And there it was. Not greed. Not inheritance. Not money. A lifetime of resentment finally exposed beneath fluorescent courthouse lights. Daniel sat heavily back into his chair. Broken. Finished. Then something unexpected happened. Ava stood. The courtroom turned toward her instantly. It was the first time she'd spoken publicly through all of this. She looked at Daniel quietly. Not angry. Not emotional. Just tired. You could have asked her to love you. The room went still. Ava's eyes filled softly. But instead you tried to own her. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Judge Holloway removed her glasses slowly. Then she spoke. This court finds the submitted evidence overwhelming. Daniel stared blankly ahead. The estate remains solely under Ava Whitmore's legal inheritance. Richard exhaled softly beside me. Judge Holloway continued. Forgery charges and financial fraud referrals will proceed immediately. Daniel closed his eyes. And then, the judge lifted one final envelope from the bench. There is one additional matter. Everyone looked up. Judge Holloway opened the envelope carefully. A final letter from Evelyn Whitmore requested to be read publicly if family conflict escalated to court proceedings. My heart stopped. Ava looked stunned. The judge unfolded the paper slowly and began reading. The courtroom stayed silent long after Judge Holloway finished reading. Some people cried openly. Others stared down at folded hands, pretending they weren't emotionally wrecked. Even the reporters stopped typing. Because Evelyn's final letter hadn't sounded angry. It sounded tired, loving, heartbroken, and somehow wiser than all of us. Family is not the people who demand pieces of you, she wrote. Family is the people who protect what's left of you when life starts taking things away. Daniel stared motionless at the defense table. Lorraine quietly sobbed beside a deputy. And Ava looked like someone finally setting down a weight she'd carried too long. Outside the courthouse, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in weeks, sunlight pushed through gray clouds in thin golden streaks across the courthouse windows. Funny how endings sometimes announce themselves softly. The charges moved quickly after that.
Forgery, fraud,
Coercion, financial misconduct. Daniel avoided prison through a negotiated plea deal and asset surrender, but the public damage was permanent. Church members stopped calling. Business contacts disappeared. People who once praised him crossed streets to avoid eye contact. Lorraine accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. Cynthia filed for divorce 3 weeks later. And suddenly all the manipulation Daniel spent years building collapsed in less than a month. Not with screaming. Not with revenge. With truth. That was always the strongest weapon. 3 months later, Ava and I stood inside Evelyn's house again. But it no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. Warm light spilled through freshly cleaned windows. The scent of cinnamon drifted softly from the kitchen. Ava had painted the hallway pale cream. The old grandfather clock ticked peacefully near the staircase. And sitting on the piano, the black notebook.
closed.
Finally at rest. The Lake House Trust changed Ava's future completely.
Evelyn hadn't lead.
The hidden assets were substantial. Royalties from old Whitmore property investments, trust distributions, protected accounts Daniel never discovered. Enough to erase Ava's student debt completely. Enough to restore the house. Enough to breathe again. But strangely, the money mattered less than the peace. That was the real inheritance. One evening in late October, Ava sat at the piano wearing one of Evelyn's old sweaters. Soft rain tapped gently against the windows again. But this time it sounded peaceful, not threatening. I sat nearby with tea in my hands while Ava opened Evelyn's final letter once more. The edges had started softening from rereading. Mom, I looked up. She really knew all along, didn't she? I smiled sadly. Yes. Ava stared down at the letter. I think Grandma understood people better than they understood themselves. She did. Ava laughed quietly through her nose. She even understood Daniel. I didn't answer immediately, because forgiveness and understanding weren't always the same thing. Some wounds healed. Others simply stopped bleeding. Ava folded the letter carefully. Then she placed it beside the black notebook. 2 objects. 2 truths. One family finally exposed completely. The piano keys sounded softly beneath her fingers moments later. Evelyn's favorite song. Moonlight Sonata. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The house no longer felt heavy.
No tensión. No whispering.
No fear waiting behind doors. Just music. Warm light. And peace returning slowly to rooms that deserved it. Some things do not need words. Ava finished playing and looked toward me quietly. You know what scares me most? What? That if Grandma hadn't kept records, Daniel might have won. I stared toward the rain outside. No, I said softly. He forgot something more dangerous than evidence. What? He forgot we weren't afraid anymore. Ava smiled slowly. And for the first time since the funeral, it felt over. Completely over. Later that night, I walked through the hallway turning off lights one by one. The framed family photos remained on the walls. Not because the pain disappeared, but because pretending history never happened never healed anyone. At the end of the hallway sat Evelyn's old cedar chest. I opened it carefully. Inside rested the pearl earrings Ava wore to court. Beside them, a single photograph of my mother smiling in the garden. Alive. Peaceful. Unburdened. I placed the final letter beside the photograph gently and closed the lid. Then I stood there for a long moment in silence, thinking about everything people inherit from one another. Money.
Pain. Secrets. Fear. Strength. Love.
And sometimes, the courage to finally protect the people who once protected you. Downstairs the piano started again softly. Rain tapped against the windows. And somewhere inside that old house, peace finally stayed. Some people inherit money. Some inherit pain. But the rarest inheritance of all is the moment you finally stop apologizing for protecting the people you love.